What is HelloFresh? With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip the trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Fall is right around the corner, and HelloFresh is there to help you plan for the busy season ahead with tasty dishes delivered right to your door. You just simply choose recipes and pick your delivery date, then lay back and enjoy the last days of summer, knowing that dinner is covered. Parents have enough back-to-school shopping and planning to do. Let HelloFresh get the groceries and save you some cash with pre-portioned meals, again, delivered right to your door. So when life gets busy, don't call for delivery, go with HelloFresh. I've been using HelloFresh for a while now, and I cannot tell you how much simpler making dinner has become. It really does give me one less thing to worry about. So go to HelloFresh.com/50whokilled and use code 50whokilled for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/50whokilled and use code 50whokilled for 50% off plus free shipping.
What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Slow Burn Media and Evergreen Podcast presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
Right now, based on the common denominators, the similarities of the victims, where they were dumped, the dismemberment, it looks like one person. Again, that leads to the theory that it's one person using this area as a dumping ground. We are here today to announce that all 4 women whose remains were discovered in Gilgo Beach last month have been positively identified. The victims are Maureen Brainard Barnes of Norwich, Connecticut, 25 years old, last seen in July 2007 in New York City. Melissa Barthelemy of the Bronx, New York, 24 years old, last seen in July 2009 in the Bronx. Amber Lynn Costello of North Babylon, New York, 27 years old, last seen in September 2010 in North Babylon. And previously announced Megan Waterman of Scarborough, Maine, 22 years old, last seen in June 2010 in Hauppauge, New York.
It does appear to us at this time that the same person or persons are responsible for all of these murders. They were killed in another location, and their remains were transported to the Gilgo Beach area that you see over there. All of them were self-employed in the escort business.
This morning, police are pouring through potential evidence they've collected from the Long Island home of Rex Sherman. Box after box removed from the crime scene. The architect and father of 2 has pleaded not guilty to murdering 3 young women over a decade ago. And now NBC News has learned that investigators in other states are looking into potential connections to more crimes. In Las Vegas, police say they may reopen some unsolved murder cases, since Sherman owns a condo there. In Atlantic City, New Jersey, authorities are taking another look at the unsolved Eastbound Strangler case from 2006, when the bodies of 4 women who worked in the sex trade were discovered in a drainage ditch. And in Rock Hill, South Carolina, police are probing if there's any connection to a young woman who vanished there in 2014. NBC News has reached out to Huffman's attorney regarding these cases, but no response. All this as Sherman sits in jail, held without bond.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Who Killed. I am once again joined by the legend himself. That's one Nic Edwards of the True Crime Garage podcast. He's been a guest on this show many times. You are familiar with his work. He has a new book on the market. He also is just killing it in the podcast world. Welcome back to the show, Nic.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on again. And it's always great to be talking true crime with you and your wonderful audience.
Thank you, sir. It has been a pleasure. And your new book, how's it going?
It's going well. The Delphi Murders, The Quest to Find the Man on the Bridge, available in paperback, hardback, Kindle, Audible. The great Kevin Pierce did the narration for the Audible book, so if you want something great to listen to, I highly recommend it, of course, and you can pick that up on Amazon. Just search my name, Nic Edwards, or The Delphi Murders, and that case slowly working its way through the court system. Thankfully, that now that there was an arrest late last year, and here we are finally with an arrest in the Long Island serial killer case, and that case starting to work its way into the court system as well.
Yeah, Rex Herman, whatever you want to call him. He actually had his first court appearance this week, and Gilgo Beach. That has been a case that has been on my radar for a long time, and I think it's been on the radar for a lot of people in this industry and people that live in the community. Obviously, when you find more than 10 bodies when you're looking for a missing person, things are going to become a little weird. And the Gilgo Beach mystery has been just that, basically, for a dozen years. And what are your thoughts on this arrest and the police work that went into getting this guy's DNA and finally putting the cuffs on him?
The judge said his name because, in my opinion, that's all that really matters, right? How the judge says this monster's name. So Rex has been charged with 3 homicides, and they have named him as the prime suspect in a 4th homicide. So that is the Gilgo 4, as they are referred to, the victims. So he's directly being charged with 3 of those homicides, and the 4th one, he used her cell phone to contact some of the other victims. So we know that he's directly tied to it. It's just, it doesn't sound like they have the DNA evidence in that case that they need, but they're going to have a circumstantial case against Rex in that 4th homicide as well. You hold that back, you charge him with these 3 and see how it goes. And so now now that his name is known to all of us, it makes sense. We talked about the belt evidence before, the WH or the HW, and now we know that it was in fact the WH initials on that belt. I've been told that that may have been his grandfather. I did a little background check on Rex and could not find anybody in his immediate family, but I didn't go back an additional generation. So not the name of his father and not his name, obviously. But so he's been charged, and he's not talking, which is a little surprising to me. He kind of strikes me from and look, I say strikes me, but it's more looking at the crimes and what he's charged with, right? And how they found him. This, to me, he strikes me as somebody that would want credit for some of this, and that may think that he's one of these cats that's smarter than the rest of us, and that's why he went undetected for so long. And so I wonder how long it will take until we see a flip, until we see him be more Dennis Rader-like and stand up there and tell. I mean, it only took Dennis Rader a couple of hours, right? Like 2.5 hours. He's like, yeah, I'm ready to tell you everything I did, because look, some of these sickos, they treat it like it's a baseball game, and Dennis Rader thought that he hit for the cycle, and he wants to tell you all about it. Now,
yeah, it's like the main event. So like,
right,
they've been building up to this, and they've got all this stuff inside of them, and they want to talk about it. And yeah, Dennis Rader was.
Rex couldn't talk about it for all this time. Wife, 2 children, at home. He can't share that information with them. He can't share the information with his friends and colleagues, obviously. We know based off of the documents that have come out of Suffolk County that they were, that he was searching and doing internet searches of the Long Island serial killer. So he was very active in following his own case and following the investigation.
Yeah, the paper trail, digital trail is very interesting when it comes to that kind of stuff, because the way investigators can go back and kind of do a forensic analysis of your computer and your searches and all that stuff, it really becomes interesting. Again, like we always joke as true crime podcasters, let's hope we never get in trouble, because if they search our search history, then we're probably going to be in the jackpot too. But yeah, when you're looking up your case, and specifically this case, and it's only, what did they say, 2.5 miles or 4 miles, 2.5 to 4 miles from his home. I mean, that's just, and he drove by that area like every day. That was like his trophy. What do they call that? Like his, it's like a killing field, but it's also like he's laying out his trophies and he gets to see.
Well, it's also a really great way for him to keep up to date on what's happening with his case. Remember, when Shannon Gilbert goes missing, nobody knew that we even had these bodies. These young women, their family members knew that they were missing, and in some cases had difficulty reporting them as missing. And it doesn't seem like there was much of an investigation going on into these missing persons cases, and no way for law enforcement to realize that they're going to find 4 of the bodies all on the same stretch of road, and then several more bodies nearby. There's no way for law enforcement to know that when these missing persons reports are being filed. But you're exactly right, Bill. This is a way for Rex to drive when he's out driving to and from work, when he's on his commute, when he's out driving for leisure maybe. He's going to cruise by these sites. He's going to see if from a distance, he's going to check to see if these spots have been disturbed in any manner, or has anything been found. He's going to be checking the news, because guess what? He doesn't need to worry that anybody's coming for him until they start finding these bodies, because the only evidence that would lead them to him eventually, even though it took all this time, is going to start with the recovery of those remains.
Let's talk about that for a second. Let's go back to the original case and how this all transpired. You mentioned Gilbert, and she had been on a date of, she was a sex worker, and she was running around the neighborhood screaming and yelling that somebody was chasing her, and nobody helped her. And then she disappeared, and so they put out a search for her, and that is when they stumbled across these bodies and then continued to find bodies. My question is, do you feel like there is a connection to these other bodies other than the Gilgo Beach 4?
I think that it would be very difficult for many people to say yes, that there's no connection from these other sets of remains to the Gilgo 4. I think it would be very difficult for people to say, nope, not connected. But one thing we need to keep in mind too, and there's no nice way to say this, not a bad area to hide a body, right? They did go undetected for so long for a reason. So I sit here and I don't know. I do think that some of those other remains are very linked to the Gilgo 4. I think it's very hard to sit here and to kind of parse it out and figure out which ones would be connected and which ones would not be connected. The big mystery for me, Bill, is the Shannon Gilbert part.
Sure.
Right? Because she's how we found these bodies to begin with, and she's hired for this party, and we've been able to review some of the things that went down or may not have gone down at that party. But in the end, we know she runs from the home. She flees the home. And Joe Brewer, who was the host of the party, he has a few of his colleagues or friends over for this wild night of drinking and who knows what else. Debauchery. I would love to know, and I would have to believe that he did, but again, we saw the flaws early on in this investigation. Did Brewer provide a good list that was vetted of the people, of the persons that were there that night at his party? If old Rex is one of those individuals, then we have a whole different set of circumstances on our hands. And think about how much Dr. Peter Hackett, how much flack that guy was taking during the case. But then you sit there and you go, well, if there's more than one serial killer that was placing bodies in this area, does that still leave that door open? He was very weird in his interaction with the Gilbert family after Shannon goes missing. And then we also know, based...
Explain a little bit of that, please, because there's a lot of people in the audience that don't know what you're referring to, and it is bizarre.
So Dr. Peter Hackett he's a man that at one point in his life was intelligent enough to get a PhD, but he then presents himself to the Gilbert family and says, I was assisting your daughter. I was helping your daughter Shannon try to overcome her demons, right? The substance abuse and beat addiction and things like that. I was treating your daughter. And that seemed very strange because they end up finding her remains in that swamp-like area, and which is not terribly far from his residence, his neighborhood, and his neighborhood's very close to where they were recovering these other bodies as well. And the Robert Kolker, who wrote The Lost Girls, has a very interesting theory, and I don't know that I should present it as his theory or if it's more of people in the area's theory, but it has to do with they were draining some of that swampland, and then Dr. Peter Hackett starts behaving oddly after that, almost like, oh no, my secret's about to be discovered. They're about to discover all these bodies that I've placed nearby. So if anybody has not read that book and they're fascinated by this case, even though a lot of that information in there may have nothing to do with Rex, with the current suspect that we have locked up right now and facing charges, that's a must read for anybody out there. But
it's a great book.
It's fantastic. Book. And then, so Peter Hackett, he says to the Gilbert family, I was treating your daughter. And then she, of course, turns up dead under, I don't care what law enforcement agency's opinions are on this matter, very suspicious circumstances, right? Can we just be human beings and agree for a moment that it's very suspicious that she goes fleeing from this house, calls 911. On the call, she says, they're trying to kill me. They're going to kill me. It's not every day that somebody calls 911 and says someone's trying to kill me, and then boom, they end up dead. I mean, so more further investigation needs to be done into that case. And let's push Peter Hackett aside because it's looking like he's not involved in anything at this point, other than making some very bad decisions of presenting himself. There's no way, Bill. He
inserted himself into the case.
Thank you.
Unnecessarily.
And tried to be, I don't know, like some kind of angel in the matter. Like, I was trying to help this troubled young lady, but we know that cannot be true. Like, there's no way that is true.
No, he's making up stories.
Exactly.
It's really weird. You see this. I mean, we've talked to law enforcement officers. We know what detectives say. Like people make false confessions. People make up lies. People make up all sorts of things about how they're involved, and sometimes people just want to be involved. But then again, there's also the people that want to be involved so they know what's going on in the case. And in this particular case, he just, even if he has nothing to do with it, he's shady.
And that goes back to the party at Brewer's house, right? And so we know that when Shannon flees the house, that she ends up knocking on the door. I believe the guy's name was Gus Coletti. This old man opens up the door. He says she's frantic. And then he says that he sees a black SUV that heads down their road. Shannon sees the dark SUV, and she decides to take off and to conceal herself elsewhere. Now, keep in mind, it could be the drugs, it could be whatever was going on at Brewer's house, or a combination of the both that made this young woman scared to death. And so by this point, she's not trusting Gus Coletti or anybody. And so she flees, and then what will happen later, Bill, is Peter Hackett then comes forward months and months later and says, she knocked on my door that night, and I was treating her for obvious drug abuse. And there's no way that happened, and then her remains end up being found near a swamp, unless he did something to that poor girl.
And then they rule it a drowning.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion in this case. And so I think what you have to do is you have to start to separate some of these things. You got to be able to compartmentalize what you do know and what you don't know. And what we do know is based off of the, 55 pages of documents that New York released on the current suspect, Rex Heuermann, that here's the evidence that we've collected against this guy. I reviewed that document more than once, and I've got to tell you, Bill, the guy looks, if he's not guilty, I don't know how you get a conviction against anybody, because it's very damning evidence against this guy. And then on top of that, that's only 3 of the victims. Prime suspect in the 4th, and we know why, because he's using her cell phone after she is believed to have been missing, abducted, and killed, and using her cell phone to communicate with these other future victims. So for those that have not reviewed those documents, what they did was they used this cell phone technology to not only ping the cell phones to figure out where they were and the activity on those cell phones, but they cross-referenced them. So look at it this way, for those who, the most simple way to break down those documents and the evidence against him and his MO for what he was doing to procure these victims is he basically used a burner phone to contact the first of the Gilgo Four. And then after that, he's now acquired the cell phone of the woman that he's killed, and he's using that cell phone to make communications with future victims. And then when he gets another victim, he's then using her cell phone to communicate and set up appointments or dates with future victims. And so that's where they can easily build a case against this guy, and then top that off by going, okay, well, when the times when those phones were in use, after we believe these women to have been dead, the cell phone is being used in the general location of his work and the general location of his home.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of clear as day, like you said. If they don't have enough evidence out of all the stuff that they've searched, the DNA, like the hairs from his wife, which is creepy and awful for her, that ends up in the tape that is on 3 of the victims. That is insane. And let's just, we haven't really said any of the victims' names, and that's one of the kind of the unfair to the victims. And, that's Amber Lynn Costello, and that's Melissa Bartholomew, and then Maureen Brainerd Barnes and Megan Waterman. Now, which is the one that he is not necessarily connected to? Is it the Waterman case, or is it?
I think it's Bernard Barnes.
Okay.
And that one, it seems like the evidence that they have in that situation is different than the evidence they have in the other 3 victims. And that probably goes back to DNA, because we do know that they were tracking this guy. Once they honed in on him, they're surveilling this dude, following him around and waiting for him to basically to deposit his DNA on something and then discard that item. because once something is trash, it's one man's trash is another man's evidence. And here he gets a little pizza. He's eating this pizza and he throws it away in a public trash can. And they're able to pull his DNA from the pizza crust, from the napkins, from anything that would be in that box. They were testing anything in that pizza box to try to pull his DNA, and then once they have that, they're comparing that profile that they just pulled from the profile that they pulled from some of the Gilgo 4 victims.
I was wondering if you have an opinion on this, and I noticed that BTK's daughter, I know that she probably hates being considered that, but she's very
I think at some point maybe
social.
we should say her name too if we were going to
Carrie.
go. Yeah,
her name's Carrie, and she's always on top of these cases, and she said that there were a lot of similarities between this guy and her father, and then BTK comes out. I don't know how he has a platform or whatever, but somehow he gets information out of jail that says, yeah, this guy is exactly like I was. And that's where the interesting part where he isn't talking comes into play, where like you had mentioned, he hasn't said anything. You think he would want to be acknowledged for this at this point?
He will at some point. I
because you're right. He's going to realize that there's no out. There is no denying what you've done because there's evidence out the wazoo, and you're going to eventually want to take credit for it. I think that's just kind of the psychological makeup of these individuals.
Unless he cannot bring himself to admit to it because he has children or he has people that he thinks that he loves, right? And so I want to really hone in on that statement that I just gave right there for a second. People that he thinks that he loves. This person, a person capable of doing what he did, is not built like me and you, not built like 99.9% of the people walking around on this big blue marble, thank God. He may think that he can love and care for individuals. He cannot. He does not possess that ability, right? Like, so when let's stay on this BTK thing for a minute, because I do think that when you want to give a comp for a well-known serial killer whose cases have been adjudicated and has been locked up and studied for years, he seems to fit. Rex and Dennis Rader seem to fit a similar mold. They are family men. Dennis Rader appears to have been much more involved in his community than maybe Rex was. But they're family men. Oddly enough, they both appear to have 2 children and had been married for a very long time, live in a very average-looking home in a very average-looking neighborhood. But another book recommendation here is Catherine Ramsland's Confession of a Serial Killer. Now, this is a book that she wrote with the help of Dennis Rader. And when this came out, I got to be honest, I do this typically with Dahmer, Bundy, Gacy, and now Dennis Rader has fallen into this same group of people. But these guys have all had multiple books written about them, and there'll probably be more books written about them in the future. So when I saw this book, Confessions of a Serial Killer, come out, I very much enjoy and respect Catherine Ramsland. So that intrigued me and made me want to read it. But at the same time, it's just like, whoa, another BTK book. Do we really need this? I've read 2 or 3 really good ones. And so I decided to pick it up just because I was in a down period of not having anything of interest to read. And the book is fascinating. So what she does is she corresponds with Dennis Rader, who is, as we know, is very happy to talk. She corresponds with him for 5 years. And then she writes this book based off of their correspondence. And a lot of it is Dennis Rader in his own words. And then she gives kind of like she kind of analyzes what she says and breaks it down at parts throughout the course of the book. And Dennis Rader clearly had a very high opinion of himself and his crimes. Now, the part in the book where he talks about he clearly has no remorse for what he's done, and he doesn't have any sympathy for the victims, and he has child victims, and Rex may have a child victim too. Remember, we have the unidentified baby, maybe even a toddler. I apologize, Bill, I don't have the age in front of me, but there's unidentified young child and the unidentified mother, right? The one of the female victims is still unidentified. I think there might even be two that are unidentified. Plus, we have the unidentified male. Now, so Rex may have a child victim as well, and Dennis Rader, he did express to Kathleen Ramsland his regret for putting his family through this, and how he hurt his family, and how the only thing that made him not want to get caught was that he would have to stop killing, which was the thing he loved the most, and what it would do to his children and to his wife. And he says the reason why is because he did truly love his daughter, he did truly love his son, and he did truly love his wife. And maybe his daughter will hear this, because we know she stays very much on top of this. And I do follow her on Twitter, and I recommend other people follow her as well. And I apologize if this is hurtful to her, but he did not love his wife. He did not love his children. Okay. And I don't have a degree on the wall that tells me that I'm allowed to give that analysis. But what I can say here is every time that he stepped outside of his home and he chose to go out and troll for a victim and chose to go out and murder innocent people, murder innocent children, he committed those crimes against those people, against their families, and against his own family. And those are the lost victims in these scenarios. And now we're seeing this play out with Rex's wife and his two adult children as well. They're being hounded by the media, which I think that it looks like that's backed off a little bit, like that's tapered off a little bit. And maybe this is a good thing. That it seems I was shocked, and I would rather be surprised than right. I always say that. And what was surprising to me, Bill, was how quickly the masses seemed to go, you know what? This poor woman and these two adult children, they had no clue what Rex was up to. They had no clue what kind of monster. This guy hid it from the police and from the public, from his colleagues and from his family so well for all of these years. They're blindsided by all of this too. And it looked like the masses did something that I've not seen happen in any other case, where very quickly that realization was made, that understanding was made, and now there's some compassion for these people too, for his wife who very quickly filed for divorce and the two adult children. And I'm very proud of all of us for showing that compassion to these people, because they are the lost victims in this scenario. And you would hope, and it, I don't think it played out that way with BTK and his family immediately. I think that was kind of slow. We were kind of slow to get to that, but you feel for these individuals as well, and it's a weird scenario, because you have all the victims that you named. They were victimized 10, 12 years ago. Their families victimized 10, 12 years ago. They've been searching for answers for all of this time. Finding Rex, finding the killer, does not bring back their loved one, unfortunately. I wish that that's the way that it worked, but it doesn't. Now, no. They do have some reasons to be happy and to rejoice, because finally the killer is discovered. Finally, we're going to start getting justice for these wonderful young women that had their whole lives ahead of them. So there is that element to it, but then the flip side of that coin is the shock and the immediate impact and pain that it delivers to this woman, this mother, this wife, and her two grown children all at the same time.
I think we are hopefully at a turning point in that regard. I mean, the exploitation of the families has always been a big problem for me as somebody that started in the media. And, you know, I remember talking to reporters when I first started, and the idea of showing up at somebody's door and knocking on it and asking them about their worst possible situation that they could fathom just kind of made me cringe. Mm-hmm. It just was something that I did not want to be a part of. I've gone, you know, I've interviewed family members and victims of these types of cases since then, and it is very difficult, and you do have to thread the needle. But the idea that these people are banging on your door, and, you know, those people that are like, if it bleeds, it leads, that type of reporter, those just people just turn my stomach, because of the fact that it's basically just exploiting these people that had no idea that they were living with this monster that you said that, I mean, again, you said it, they didn't know. It's like, what are we going to get out of talking to them other than ruining more of their lives? Like, let's just leave them alone. And I hope that continues, because I know people wanted to think like, oh, maybe she was involved because her hair was there. But then the police were like, listen, she was out of town when these cases happened, and she's not involved. So I think that's another reason why people have
clearly not. I mean, they have evidence that backs up and suggests that she was either out of the country or out of town, out of the state at the time when a lot of this happened. And we can base that off of all off of cell phone technology. Rex's cell phone, the victim's cell phones, and the wife, the soon-to-be ex-wife's cell phone as well.
Yes. I want to kind of discuss what the hell has he been doing for the last 12 years? Did he do a Dennis Rader? Did he get scared, or did he just lose the passion, or what? What do you think?
I think that, look, there's no doubt that some of these guys can age out of the violence. But I don't think that that's what happened here. I think it's like what you said with Dennis Rader, where that appears, and I don't think Dennis Rader would ever admit this. He comes close to admitting it at times with different cases in that Confessions of a Serial Killer book. But because they have such an ego of themselves, I don't think that they will admit, oh, I got scared off from what I do. They would rather tell you, Bill, that, no, I do it so well it doesn't matter what the cops do. Dennis Rader, it's like, I'm going to write my own book about myself being a serial killer and send it to the police and to the media. I mean, come on, dude. And so I think,
and I'm going to ask if it's able to be
right,
traced.
Can you trace a floppy disk?
I hate to laugh, but I'm sorry.
Right, either send the floppy disk or don't send it. Don't ask if you can trace it. That seems like, anyway. I think absolutely you're right. I think Rex got scared off. I think they started finding the victims, and now there's an investigation, and there's multiple agencies involved, FBI included, and I think he got scared off. And I think Dennis Rader at some point got scared off, and he would take these long breaks, and who's to say, I bet you Rex would have done the same thing. He would have gone back to it eventually. He would eventually have believed that he was out of the woods, that, oh, they'll never trace this to me, and I got to get back to doing what I do. And there was some talk about him possibly retiring soon. And if he were to retire, that he might move down to, there was talk of him moving to South Carolina. Now, I don't know if that was just.
Yeah, I did hear that.
I don't know if that was bad information, because I believe his brother lives in South Carolina, or he has extended family in South Carolina. So that could just be bad information. But let's for a second explore it as good information. If this serial killer were to retire from his job and move elsewhere, dude, as soon as he got across state lines, he's going to start picking up where he left off. No doubt in my mind. And
Israel Keys.
Yeah, and when we go back further in time too, a serial killer that's fascinated the United States like no other, the Zodiac Killer, I really believe that he got scared off as well. And he may have relocated and started up elsewhere, or, some of these guys, Dennis Rader told us about this, and if you really dive into Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, you will see the same example with him too. And this is a good thing for all of us, but they will tell you sometimes life gets in the way, right? We all have our passions, and we all have used that expression. Oh, it's been a long time since you worked on that car that you've been restoring there, Bill. What's kept you? Oh, life got in the way. I got busy with work. I got busy with family. I got busy with other things, and life got in the way. And so I think it's a less of a life got in the way situation, but for those three in particular, I think they got scared. And I think Rex was scared. And what I'm very happy to see is there were times that I was convinced that there was not much of an investigation going on in this case. And here, now that the curtain has been fully opened, we see that no, they never stopped investigating this case. And in fact, really in the last 2 years or so is when the investigation ramped up. It almost seems like they were doing more work on it in the last 2 years than they did when they first started finding the victims. And you know why I think that is, Bill? I think it was in more capable hands.
I think so too. I was going to ask you, James Burke, the classy guy that he was running the police. He was the chief of police, and he got put in jail for beating a guy he beat a guy with a bag of sex toys, I believe, and ended up going to jail. So he was the guy that was in charge of the police at that time for a lot of that time, and I do think that he was a deviant of his own because he also was connected to sex workers, and there was rumors. I mean, I had Maggie on Freeling a couple years ago, and that was her number one suspect in her mind. That the police chief had something to do with it, or that he was stalling the investigation. Again, we still have other bodies that haven't been connected to this guy, Rex. And we have other people that are still suspect. I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that guy? I mean, James Burke, that guy was a piece of work.
Yeah, yes, definitely a piece of work. And from my understanding, he's been locked up due to charges of beating a guy that escaped. Didn't the guy escape from his patrol car, from his cop car? And the guy broke into his vehicle and stole pornography and sex toys from the vehicle, something of that nature. And so he beats.
The guy stole his sex toy. Yes. James Burke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stole from his police
Porn
vehicle.
stash.
Yeah. That was stored in his police vehicle. But now keep in mind, on top of that though too, before that we had Commissioner Dormer, who I think was the commissioner of Suffolk County at the time, and he was kind of the face of the investigation as well. But he was a very older gentleman, and he already had plans, like filed the paperwork and everything to retire. And then they find the Gilgo 4, and he's like, "Oh God, I got this, this nationwide case now all of a sudden on my shoulders, and I had already planned to retire." So who knows how invested they were during that. And then it's handed over to Burke at some point. There's all the problems that you point out, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with the problems with Burke and his administration and regime. I mean, and I think, look, I don't think he makes a good suspect.
No,
but what I think we have here is, and I would have said that before there was an arrest in the case. But what I think you have here is you have a guy that is up to no good, one of the highest ranking police officials in the area, and I think Maggie's spot on that he was delaying the investigation or very likely preventing other agencies, more intelligent agencies, more capable agencies of coming in and reviewing the case, because he did not want them to stumble onto what he was up to, and all the laws that he and some of his underlings were breaking at the time. So yeah, I got very my confidence level in this whole investigation changed when we had and I failed to have her name right here in front of me, Bill, but when the new regime took over, and it was a former FBI agent that came in and was the commissioner or the chief of police in the area for a period of time, and I believe she was the one responsible for this GilgoNews.com website that started. And what we see once she took over, and the current commissioner is Rodney K. Harrison, but once we see with these new regimes that come in is a huge shift in the investigation, the way that it's being worked, the intelligence level of the way that it's being investigated, and we know the result. We get the result of finally having somebody in handcuffs, a face, a name, and somebody that has to stand in front of a judge.
Hey, Nic, thanks so much again for joining me on part 1 of the Gilgo Beach monster, serial killer, whatever you want to call him. And we will be right back with part 2. So thanks again, Nic.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks again to Nic from the True Crime Garage podcast for taking time out of his wildly busy schedule. He is now a published author with the book Delphi, The Quest for the Man on the Bridge. Check that out wherever you get your favorite books, and you get that on Amazon, Audible, and pretty much anywhere else. So again, check out their podcast, True Crime Garage, if you haven't already. It's amazing. Nic is always a great guest. He brings tons of knowledge to the show, and it's very appreciated. I know that a lot of people enjoy having him on as much as I do. So again, thanks again. And thank you for tuning in. And as you know, I drop new episodes every Friday. And this is part 1. Part 2 will be coming up in just a few minutes. So stay tuned. And if you want to follow me on Twitter or X or whatever the hell Elon Musk is calling it these days, let's do that at Bill Huffman 3. So as always, until next time, stay healthy and be safe.
The crime was so brutal it was compared to the Manson murders. Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case, explores what it takes to bring new attention to an unsolved double homicide and turns up new hope for answers. Listen to Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case from IdeaStream Public Media, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hear Her Sports is a podcast for everyone who loves stories by and about women striving to improve and make a difference in their lives. I am your host, Elizabeth Emery, a former professional cyclist. In every episode, I introduce a female athlete or woman in the business of sport through a thoughtful conversation about who they are and the terrific work they're doing. My guests and I explore the glorious and frustrating issues in sports, history, equity, training, nutrition, and so much more. Join us for inspiration, for community, and for love of being a strong, athletic woman.